Welcome to Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Bobby Pominville, and I'm your reporter on the arts. And I'm delighted to have a guest today who is an author, and a very special person because she is a former student of mine. I would like to welcome Amy Richardson Timberlake to the show. Welcome, Amy.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's just great that you had some time to come here. And she's been, actually, you've been having a book signing in the area.
Yeah, I was at chapter 2.
And I just love it that they do that. And I did hear about it through the paper, so I was very happy to get contact with you again. And so I would like you first to start out and tell us about your background and how you got started writing books.
The first thing that I remember is that I came home from school one day with a poem that I had written, and it was just really fun, and I was just playing, and I wrote this poem, and I gave it to my dad, and he was sitting on the couch, and I remember this really vividly, and I just sort of threw it at him and then went on my way. But as I was on my way out, he said, "Oh, you have a knack for that." And I thought, I think something just started there where I suddenly thought, wait a minute, that's something that I'm good at? Is that something that I should be doing? And yes. I think pretty soon after that, he said something like, well, you can't make a living at that. And I mean, this actually comes, and so the next probably, I don't know, 10 years of my life, I had this thing that I liked to do, and my dad really loved that I did it. But my family is a business family. And so, every night at dinner we would talk business, and seriously, over the table we would just talk about business issues. And there were these relatives in the past in my family that had been artists and had not done that well. Well, according to the family lore. The family lore was that if you were an artist, eventually you were going to come to your family and need financial help. And this had actually happened.
It's often true. Yes.
So there was a journalist, my great-grandfather was a journalist, and he basically ran the newspaper in this small town, but it was a labor of love, and he was actually supported by his wife's flower shop. And that was actually how they made their money. And then there was a great-great-aunt who was a portrait painter, and she was in Boston during the time period where it would have been really helpful had she been a man and possibly European to make a living as a portrait painter. She was painting a lot of people's wives.
Oh, yes.
So, and what actually happened was she eventually lost her sight very slowly, and so she was asking my family for money, like my grandfather. Mm-hmm. And I never heard about the sight part, but I sort of got the feeling that, look, if you want to do the arts, you need to have a way to support that. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do that. So I was a pre-business major in college, and then I switched to history because history is not fiction, it is fact. And I figured that, okay, so that's more serious. And then I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a PhD in history. And then when I get a PhD, I will eventually get tenure. And I mean, that's like the perfect job for being an artist, isn't it?
Yes.
Because you have a secure job, and then you could write that book that you've been thinking about writing. And meanwhile, I was taking every single creative writing class I could all the way through college and high school, college, and then eventually. But when I dropped out of graduate school, much to my family's dismay, I mean, it was not a good scene. I dropped out, and then I realized, what have I been wanting to do all this time? It's writing. So I thought, okay, I know it's not practical, but let's do this. So then I started getting like a day job where I was like, okay, so I'm not career focused, I'm pay the bills focused. And then at night, I'm going to work on this other stuff.
Wow.
So that's sort of how it happened. And my family really loves that I am I'm a writer. I mean, they love that, but it's just, it was sort of a long road of me becoming comfortable with that and knowing that there was like a family history of, okay, you know, we've had these passionate people in our family before. So that was kind of how it went. And then eventually I did get like an MA in English and creative writing.
Oh, wonderful.
And, but I think that the real thing about being a writer is just taking the time to practice. And so honestly, having a day job and just writing at night was actually probably the best school I could have gotten. Just keep writing, just try it again, you know, all of that.
And then how did it but how long did it take you to write that first book or to get that much of a manuscript?
Yeah, you mean the first book that I published?
Yeah.
You
wrote many books before that, yeah. I'm sure.
The ones in my drawer came before.
Yes, I see.
So there's a stack of paper like this high, or probably more. I mean, at this, floppy disks. It would have been floppy disks full.
Yes.
I don't know where they are now. They're probably good that they're lost in obsolete technology.
Right.
But the first book actually is that I got published was a children's book, and it was a picture book. And the way that happened was, as I was finishing, I finished my master's thesis in English, and that was actually written for adults. And it was a piece of historical fiction, never saw the light of day except for my advisor, and it got me my degree. So I'm really happy about that.
Oh, yes.
But I finished that, and I was thinking about what did I want to write next. And I remembered this family story that my family had told. Actually, it was from that great-grandfather that was the journalist that he supposedly reported it as a true story, and it had been passed down in my family for years. It's called The Dirty Cowboy. That's what we called the story ourselves. So, and I was thinking about what I wanted to write next, and I thought, you know, that just sounds fun. I want to write a fun story. I just want to have fun. So I thought, I'm going to write this story, this family story, The Dirty Cowboy, and see if I can get it published. But by that point, I'd been writing for quite a long time. You know, so I think the story took me 2 weeks to write, and then I wrote it, so it's about 6 pages long in text. So it took about 2 weeks, and then I submitted it for about 3 to 4 years, 5 years, something like that. I was being very cautious and submitting one publisher at a time, so you had to wait for them to say no. And then finally I found a publisher for it. And then once I had that foot in the door, then I was able to write more for children. Though anybody can read these books.
Yes.
So
that's important to know.
Yeah, really.
Because they're really written for a purpose of you expressing yourself. And I think adults can get a lot out of that.
Yeah.
I like to sit with children's books anyway sometimes.
Yeah, they're fun to read.
Yes, they are. Now, back up just a little bit. Did you have to find an illustrator?
Oh, no. No, when you publish children's books and you don't illustrate yourself, that is kind of, the way I think of it is, it's one of the things that the publisher actually likes to do, is bringing the right illustrator to the words.
All right,
so,
that's interesting.
I mean, I don't know that they say it like that, but I sort of think of that, if you're an editor and you're working in that field, that's sort of part of their fun of their job.
Oh, okay.
So,
That's very interesting, because I've known authors who have approached it a different way.
Yeah.
Or they've known someone and they've started to contact people. Or I had a lady on the show one time that did her own illustrations.
And
she knew a little bit about art.
Yeah, well maybe, I mean...
So that was interesting, but, so you gave it over to your publisher.
Yeah, and I was really fortunate with the illustrator for that first book.
And you were very happy with it, I'm sure.
The book was set in the Southwest. That one is set in the Southwest in New Mexico, and the illustrator that they got, who's now a very well-regarded illustrator, Adam Rex. This was his first book, and he was from that area. So he could just draw all that landscape and have those reds and yellows and oranges. I mean, it has a really, mature palette, actually.
That area you would have to have somebody that really knew a lot about it.
Yeah, and he could just do it.
Well, that's wonderful. So that all worked for you.
Yeah, it was great.
Excellent. Yeah, I remember that title. I remember reading about that. And then you wrote another book.
Yeah, That Girl, Lucy Moon.
And that's for what age group? We'll keep our minds open
9
here.
and up.
Oh, wonderful. And today we're talking about...
One Came Home.
Your latest book, your most recent book.
Yes.
And it's based in Wisconsin.
It is. It is.
I love that.
I actually, both That Girl, Lucy Moon and this book are based in the Midwest. That Girl, Lucy Moon is Minnesota. This one is Wisconsin. This is 1871, southwestern Wisconsin. And it's set right next to an enormous passenger pigeon nesting that actually happened in the state of Wisconsin in the year 1871. And it's a fictional town, so I gave myself permission to make up everything about it. But the setting is this huge passenger pigeon nesting, and that was an extinct species that roamed the North American continent. I think more on the east side of the Mississippi, but it's just, or not Mississippi, it would have been like on the Rockies. Sorry, I'm thinking of those great geological divides. There's and then there's the Rockies, and I don't remember seeing a lot of information about them on the other side of the Rockies. So, but they were huge. They were big birds. They were about the size of a crow. They're bigger than a city pigeon, and they were in numbers, billions. Billions. So the size of a crow, billions of birds, flying 60 to 70 miles per hour in mass, like layers of birds.
Oh,
so
that's quite a picture.
Oh, it's crazy. It's insane, kind of science fiction sort of history, which is perfect for a setting.
Wow, I guess so. I just was shocked to read about that and hear about that and how you discovered that, and that part's true?
Yeah, the nesting is true.
Really true.
It is.
It existed.
Yeah, there's a historian out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he's no longer living, but he wrote sort of the definitive history of passenger pigeons. His name is A.W. Shorger. So if anybody is looking for a history of passenger pigeons, that's the one that you really want to read, because this guy spent 10 years of his life and he went through every single newspaper and collated every time passenger pigeons were nesting. He wrote to people because it came out in 1955, so he could actually write to people who remembered the birds. They went extinct in 1914. So he could write to people and find stuff. So and he thought that this was possibly the largest nesting that ever happened. There's another big one up in Ontario, but this is certainly big. And so just to give the facts, because I can't stop talking about them. It's 850 square miles. This nesting was 850 square miles, and the state of Rhode Island is 2,010 square miles. So you're talking about a big chunk of Rhode Island, like covered with these birds, and they left in mass. Like they would leave the nesting in mass. Like I think it is that the males went first. They would leave the nest first, or they would come back. So and then the females would leave, and they actually did everything together in some ways. So it was incredibly noisy. I don't even know. So on your logo over here, if we were to say where in the state it was, kind of be where the W is. So it went from like Black River Falls to Wisconsin Dells to Wisconsin Rapids. It was like a V, this big nesting. The 850.
Okay.
And that's actually how this book started. Was I was reading this book, this history of passenger pigeons, and I turned the page and I saw a map of Wisconsin, my state.
Yes,
that's my
your
state.
My goodness.
And then I see this big blob in the middle of the state, and I think, holy smokes, what is that? What is that doing in the middle of my? What is that? And I read. I was like, it was this enormous passenger pigeon nesting. I thought, I never knew that happened in my state.
I didn't know anything about that.
Somebody might have told me, but I'm not sure. You know, it took me a while to love history. It wasn't until college. So I don't want to blame any teachers for not telling me because I don't know.
No, I don't know. That would be a interesting subject matter, but to think that it all happened in Wisconsin and it's that huge of an event.
Yeah, just amazing. So that's a setting kind of for the book.
I'm thinking of how intelligent these birds are. I mean, I think about crows, how they're kind of communal, and I think these birds really interact quite well. And there are certain things that they do every year.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's interesting. I mean, they were very communal. Like you're saying, they're very social and very. So, I mean, in the time period, they were thought of as stupid birds because they followed each other exactly when they flew.
Yes.
So you could basically kill them to eat. I mean, to eat really pretty easily in a way, you know, because like you could. There are crazy stories. Like this is a great history to read, but like there are stories of people sticking up a fry pan and having the birds just run into the fry pan and then but I mean that would actually be dangerous because they went 60 to 70 miles per hour. So it's going to be quite a hit on your fry pan. But so there's stories like that. So they were thought of as stupid, but I think that actually they were so social that it was kind of a different sort of intelligence than you would think of.
Yes.
And I take issue with that.
Well, and you know, when I put my mind back to the 1800s, times were different.
Yes, very.
I mean, you had to find food where you could.
Yeah, and the passenger pigeons were kind of like when you had somebody who wandered into town and didn't have food, you were really happy to see these birds because you knew that people were going to be able to put meat on the table. They were also going to be able to dry it so that winter, you know, the next winter and into this, you know, the later summer, they're going to have food. So it was a blessing.
So the early settlers really probably needed this type of a thing and did use them for their food.
Yeah, they did. They did. And then as it, would you like the story of what happened to them?
I'm kind of nervous about, yes, of course I do.
Okay.
I do want to hear about it.
Well, I am not a passenger pigeon expert, but here's how I think of it. In 1871, one of the things that happened, so you have people eating it for food. Even the Ojibwe were also eating these birds for food. I mean, everybody did this. But then once you had the trains that were coming through and you had the telegraph, suddenly you could sort of industrialize hunting these pigeons, and you could find out where they were nesting. Every conductor on the train would know where the passenger pigeons were. So when the conductor came in, people would say, well, where are the pigeons? And they called them like wild pigeons or something like that. So, and then they would find out where they were. And there were professional pigeon hunters, and they would just travel to wherever the pigeons were. They would hire local people. They would then put the pigeons into these enormous barrels, and they could pack them up into these barrels and then ship them to the cities for the markets. And these were just called wild game, as far as I know. They weren't like specific, like, oh, now you're eating passenger pigeon. It was actually just, you know, today's wild game is not quail or whatever. It's
a whole different thought process to me, because you're in a different era.
Yeah, so that's what was happening. So you kind of had people really, and then the telegraph too was another way that people found out about where the birds were. So once you had the birds sort of chased down like that, then the hunting actually took on another level. So it might have been sustainable had people just been hunting them, because, you know, people sort of got sick of pigeons, pigeon pie and all these things. So they wouldn't have, you know, I don't think they would have taken like as much as when they had these pigeoners chasing them. And then there's the other aspect, and this is kind of a a theory, and I believe I've read about this somewhere, but all right, so you know the Borg in Star Trek? Do you know like the Borg?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
I have a son who's into that.
All right, that's the way I sort of think about this.
Yes.
When you have a species that is incredibly social like that,
Yes.
and then you decimate it down to a certain level,
Right.
I don't know where that point is where they can't really deal with being at those few numbers, but I think that that's probably what happened with the passenger pigeon, that they got down to, you know, there's only this little group of passenger pigeons, but now it's too small for them, and then their decline is just, you know, it's pretty much, but you wouldn't, I mean, you probably wouldn't think, oh gosh, you know, no, they have 1 million. I don't know, that seems like plenty of passenger pigeons, but maybe not for them. So then that kind of makes, in 1914, when Martha dies at the Cincinnati Zoo, that's the last passenger pigeon. It's sort of even more poignant and sad when you think about this poor pigeon dying in the zoo, probably calling to hear some sort of other birds of her species or another passenger pigeon, and she can't find.
That's very poignant.
Yeah, so it's very sad then.
And it's very, very sad to think they're extinct and how that happened.
Yeah, and they were just beautiful to see too. Yes. If you've ever seen starlings doing murmurations where they twist, passenger pigeons would do that, but they were big birds and they flew very closely together, and they had blue and green and red, and so, you know, if the setting sun was hitting them, I mean, people talk about the flashes of colors that would fill the sky, and you just think, oh my gosh, how much do I want to see that?
Oh.
Yeah.
That's very sad. So that's one of the themes in your book.
Yeah, it's
how they became extinct.
Well, I talk more about the passenger pigeons. They are part of the setting. Because in the story, it's set in 1871, so she's not going to Georgie Burkhart, my main character of One Came Home, she's not going to necessarily think that she shouldn't shoot them, because they're very common. They're like, I mean, people didn't even really think about these birds. They were like, we would think about maybe squirrels. You know, I mean, they didn't even really study them well enough to know how many nestings they did in a year or how many eggs they laid. I mean, people had different stories about them. So it's really, I mean, one of the things that's hard about passenger pigeons is you have to be careful about your sources, because you can get really bad information really quickly, because there were all these sort of myths about them because no one actually studied them. So anyway, I would go to A.W. Shorter. But so my character is set in this town near this nesting, so she's not going to think I shouldn't shoot them. But she's going to experience the chaos and the big. They fly over her. They fly over her town, and then later she ends up going through the nesting after they've left. So then when you see the nesting at that point, you're also seeing what it looked like after the passenger pigeons were done with this 850 square mile area, but you're also seeing what kind of destructions the hunters have left on it, because people came from everywhere to hunt these birds. So then they were set up all along this, probably. So it's kind of a crazy, it's crazy, which is really fun.
That.
Well, you'd have to read the A.W. Shorter book, and then you'll be thinking about it all the time. It's a crazy history. It's one of those things you just read, and you read the little stories that people, you know, they recount, these passenger pigeons, and if your husband is sitting across the room, you keep interrupting him every 10 minutes, and you say, Phil, well, guess what I just read? And you're like, I promise this is the last time I will interrupt you.
Well, that's very interesting, and I love that it's a native Wisconsin story.
Yeah, it is.
And I like that you bring in the Ojibwe.
Ah, yeah.
Because I think that's very important for our history.
Yeah, yeah. I think they don't have a huge part in this book, but they are part of the history when she goes through it. So I don't know, there might be a sentence or two, but I was definitely thinking about the whole picture, because I think that everybody relied on these birds for food and for
Well, I'm just thinking about
sustenance.
my neighbor right now is from Wisconsin Dells, and I think she is Native American, and I think she would find this very interesting.
Oh, great. Well, I'd love
So
for her to know about
there's another
it.
person that would be interested in your book.
Yay. That would be great.
Yeah, I'm going to tell her. Now, do you want to introduce the section you're going to read yet? Or you can't divulge the whole story, can you, Amy?
No, and I didn't.
No, you don't want to do that.
No, but I'm going to do
Because
the
you've got to
opening.
save some.
I'll do the opening.
That would be perfect.
Because it's a,
perfect.
As I said, it's a Western.
I would love that.
Okay, so, and if I don't catch you here, so chapter 1, this is the beginning.
Right.
So it comes to this. I remember thinking on Wednesday, June 7th, 1871. The date sticks in my mind because it was the day of my sister's first funeral, and I knew it wasn't her last, which is why I left. That's the long and short of it. But surely you'd rather hear the long than the short. At the moment of the above thought, I stood wedged between Ma and Grandfather Bolt. Ma seemed a statue in black, except for the movement of her thumb and forefinger over a scrap of blue-green fabric. Grandfather Bolt sighed, adjusting his hands on the hat he held in front of his belly. Seeing the Reverend on the other side of that 6-foot hole reminded me that I was sister of the deceased, a fancy title for someone who stands quietly, holds her tongue, and maintains a mournful attitude. But I could barely stay still. I was not in this situation by choice and wore a borrowed black dress to boot. The collar clamped to my neck and the tension of the muslin between my shoulder blades suggested that if I let my arms fall to my sides, that dress would rip somewhere in the proximity of my armpits. So there I was, sticking a finger down my collar, holding my arms out from my sides, and the meaner part of me thinking about walking out. Surely enough is enough. But Grandfather Bolt saved me from strangulation. He unbuttoned the top 2 buttons on that collar, and from somewhere deep in my depths came a patience I didn't know I possessed. I stayed. Now don't misunderstand me. A funeral is a funeral. Though my sister wasn't in that pine box, a body lay in it sure enough. Remember, I told myself many times during the Reverend's eulogy, and then as people started shoveling dirt into the hole, that coffin body down there is dead. That's a D at the beginning and a D at the end. There's no forward or backward from dead, and no breath either. Dead stops a person cold. It does not make that body your sister, but it is sad, sad news. The way I figured it, I'd survive this funeral, and then I was free to go. My sister, Agatha Burkhart, had run off with pigeoners, 2 men and 1 woman in a forlorn-looking buckboard. Sheriff McCabe went after those pigeon hunters, following them all the way to Dog Hollow. 1 week later, he came back with the body. Ma said I was old enough to face facts, so I went with Ma and Grandfather Bolt out to the McCabe stables to identify. You could smell the body from outside the building. Inside, dust hung in a twist of sunlight, an old mare stamped in a far stall, and a pine box lay on a roughly hewn table. Grandfather Bolt walked straight up to that box and slid the lid off. I do not want to talk about what I saw, but if you're to understand the rest, here's what you need to know. There wasn't a lot of body left. The sheriff said that it had been exposed to animals. There wasn't a face. There wasn't a left or right hand. The body was wrapped in fabric from Agatha's blue-green ball gown. There was a clump of auburn hair. I started to shake. I still have nightmares. That body was in an advanced state of decomposition, but I am glad I looked. I know what I saw. I also know what I didn't see. Grandfather Bolt put his hand to his mouth and turned away. Ma stood there taking it all in, pausing for what seemed like months. Then she asked Sheriff McCabe for his knife. When he didn't give it to her, she laid her eyes on him. They stared at each other for a long while, and then he pulled it from its sheath. It was a big knife, the kind of knife with a sharp upturned point. Ma took it, reached into that pine box, and sawed a hunk of something off. I inhaled sharply. Then her hands reappeared. The right hand held the knife, and the left a fistful of blue-green cloth. I saw pleats. Ma stepped back. You were tracking the pigeoners when you found this? Ma jabbed the air with the knife. We knew he was, so the jerk of the knife panicked me a little. Grandfather Bolt tried to reach for the knife, but Sheriff McCabe held him back. I was on their trail. the sheriff said. She's still traveling with them? Pretty sure she was. She was shot in the face. The blade jerked upward. The sheriff nodded ever so slightly. I am so sorry, Dora. He laid out the syllables of her name with the most tender care. Sometimes I forget how long they've known each other. Ma's chest rose in a long breath. Then she opened up her left hand and nodded at the fabric as it unrolled. These are my stitches, she said. The knife dropped from her hand, planting itself in the earthen floor. It's Agatha. We'll bury her tomorrow.
Oh my.
That's the opening.
That is very engaging.
It's a Western.
Oh, I found a lot of things that were very interesting in that.
Oh.
And the way you describe things is just, it's very, very readable.
Oh, thank you.
I like the way you embellish things. And
oh, good.
And this is a pretty serious thing that's going on. I mean, I couldn't help but be affected by it.
Yeah, it's worrisome.
It is. It very much is.
And she's 13, so...
But I was kind of identifying with the people, too, in the 1800s.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like what?
Well, because I'm from North Dakota, and all my relatives settled there in the 1800s.
Yeah, of course.
And I've heard stories.
Oh, really?
Yeah, about animals and Indians coming to the door and of the huts.
Yeah, yeah.
The mud huts and all that.
Well, you're going to have to tell. I would like to hear these stories.
Grandparents and great-parents and things like that. And I've always taken interest in that because it was a different time. And then I've tried to, I'm tracking some genealogy, and I've got 3 or 4 branches done. Can't take credit because I have a cousin who's in,
that's great.
in archives.
Yeah.
And he's done it all. But the interesting thing is all the things that happened back in that time that we know nothing about.
Yeah.
Just kind of put me back there.
Oh, great.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
I enjoyed it. And then thinking about Wisconsin, too.
Yeah, this is not a tame state.
No. Well, can you imagine what it was like in those days?
Yeah.
Oh, my.
Then you had the birds.
Yeah, that's another element that kind of adds to the story. And in a way, it's concerning to me, but yet I'm interested to know what happened. Wow, that's very good.
Oh, great, thank you.
Thank you for doing that. You read it so well.
Oh, good.
Okay, now we're going to change the subject. Can you tell us about publishing and how difficult that is, or how easy it is for you to get a book published? And any suggestions you might have, because I don't know, there might be some budding writers out there. Yeah, well, there's 2 kinds of, and when you said difficult, the thing that comes to mind is that there's 2 kinds of difficulties in my head about writing and publishing a book. And I think the first one is just writing it. Is finding that time to do the actual work. I admire you for that. And so I think that is actually probably the biggest difficulty. I mean, the publisher is definitely complicated and all of that, but the first difficulty is actually just saying, no, this is important enough that I am actually going to set aside some regular time to do the work and just have those really bad days where you're just thinking, this is the worst sentence I have ever written, and I am clearly not a writer. I can imagine. So I think that that's the first thing. I mean, this book took about, I hate to say this, but about 3 years to write. So, you know. I'm glad you said that because I think that's interesting. I had no idea. Yeah, so it just, you know, so you're thinking, okay, well, this is like an inch thick. I kind of wish for 3 years that I had at least like, but I mean, what it is when you do end up writing feet of book, you know, and then you end up like winnowing it down. You're just reducing. Yes, it's kind of like making a jam. You're reducing it over heat over that time and reworking and reworking. And I do a lot of drafts. So I think that actually is the first
difficulty, and also just giving yourself time to practice and giving yourself time to be bad at writing, because that's also, so once you've done that part, and since publishing is changing so drastically right now, if it does take you 3 years to get through that first difficulty, then who knows exactly what kind of technology you're going to find on the other end. So then at that point, my advice might be completely, you know, I don't know who I'm exactly speaking to and what the situation is. But if you're talking about traditional publishers, which this is done by Knopf, so, and Random House owns them.
Oh, I see.
Then yes, it is difficult. And right now in particular, it is difficult because everybody's feeling the strain of this new era that's coming down the pike and trying to figure out how does the old model, which was based on paper, how does that translate to some, I think there are always going to be books, frankly. So, you know, some paper, some electronic, you know, ebooks, all of that. So it is, they're more selective right now. You have to kind of get it in really good shape by the time they see it, because everybody is feeling the press of, you know, cutting back a little bit or whatever. I don't know. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I know that everybody's feeling pressed. And you can sort of tell that the quality has to be really, they have to go, wow, I want to publish this. So that's the first thing. And then but the other part of that is because the publishing industry is changing so much, it also means that there's a real opportunity to get your stuff out there in ways that you couldn't before. And I think that that is really good. You know, for instance, if you want to write something for your family or you want to write, you can have that happen. There is no reason, and it will not cost that much. It will cost you in time because you have to write it. You still have to get over the first difficulty. But then, then you can still, you know, you can get it out there. You can get it printed. You can, if you want a paper copy, you can have that happen, and it can be a beautiful book. And in a way, it might be very, very satisfying, you know, to be able to design your own cover and just go through the whole process of what a book, what it is to make a book. I mean, I certainly find that attractive.
Oh yes, I do too.
So I think it's, you know, there's more opportunities, and then the traditional publishers, it's tougher right now. So.
Well, that's very interesting. It's an interesting take you have on it, and yes, you're right, because technology has changed things so much. But yet, I don't think there's a substitute for a real book.
Oh, I love books.
Yeah. And thinking about the children and the students and how important reading and books are.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I commend you.
Oh,
it's wonderful. You've done a wonderful thing here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very, very interesting. Now, where can our audience find the book or contact you?
Well, you can find out about me and more about the book, and there's just tons of crazy information on my website. That's amytimberlake.com. You can see, you can find out more interviews, like blog interviews, and you know, where I discover something in the process of writing the first blog post, and then I discover, wait, there's this other thing, and I write the next blog post. So there's all sorts of stuff like that. There's stuff on the birds. There's a discussion guide. So if you want to use it for a book group, or you want to bring it to your classroom, there's an easy way to share it with students. And then the book itself, I'm really happy to say it's showing up everywhere. So, and it just went into its second printing. It just came out in January, so that's great. And it's a Junior Library Guild selection, so that's nice too, because it means that your libraries might get it as sort of a subscription.
Oh, wonderful.
And it will be an audiobook at some time. They've decided to make an audiobook out of it. I'm
good.
really excited about that. I don't know when that will happen, but that's brand new information, and you're actually the first person I've told.
That's just wonderful because I
Yeah.
think that's a sign of the times. It's the future.
Yeah, and it is an ebook as well. So you can get it as an ebook, you can get it as a hardcover copy, and then next year in 2014, at the 100-year anniversary on passenger pigeons, it will come out as a paperback sometime in the spring. So
100th anniversary
Yeah,
is coming?
1914 was when Martha died in the Cincinnati Zoo, and the book is going to be a paperback at the same time. So
oh my goodness.
That was a coincidence, but it's nice.
It's wonderful. How great for you, and it just
Yeah, it's been really nice.
well, it's going to be very, very well used and read.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
Thank
That's the thing that
goodness.
you want, is you just want people to find out about the book and read it and find more readers.
I assume they have it at Chapter 2 Books.
They do. Also Red Balloon
Okay.
in St. Paul.
And have you gone into the schools at all?
Just a little bit. It's just, it's new yet.
Yes.
But just a little bit. I've done some in some schools in Illinois, and I'm going to do some schools in the Milwaukee area. So closer.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, closer to where the nesting is. There's a couple children's book festivals.
Oh, yes.
And I will be at 2 of those. And all that information is on the website, amytimberlake.com.
Oh, that's wonderful information. I'm so glad you told me about that. And I do know our audience going all the way to Madison is going to find this very interesting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's their history.
And native Wisconsin people, it's just, it's a very nice subject. I'm glad you did it. You did a wonderful job with it.
Oh, thank you.
Well, that brings our interview to an end, but I have really enjoyed this.
Thank you so
And
much.
It's so wonderful to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's been great.
And I'm just really impressed with everything you're doing, Amy.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being my elementary music school teacher, too.
You're very welcome. You were wonderful, Peppermint Patty. I shall never forget that.
Thank you.
And I do want to thank our audience for watching the show today, and I hope you enjoyed it.